The storm had been raging for 3 days when Elias first heard the knocking. It wasn't the erratic battering of wind-flung debris against the reinforced glass of the Blackwater Lighthouse lantern room, nor the rhythmic, thunderous crash of the North Sea against the granite foundation. It was distinct, measured, and impossibly coming from the heavy oak door at the base of the tower, a door sealed from the inside against a tempest that had long since swallowed the narrow stone causeway connecting the solitary rock to the mainland. Elias Thorne, a man whose face was mapped with the deep ravines of 40 years spent tending isolated beacons, paused his polishing of the immense Fresnel lens. The beam of light, a piercing yellow finger probing the chaotic darkness, swung past him in its relentless cycle. For a moment, he convinced himself it was a trick of the acoustics in the hollow stone cylinder, a manifestation of the isolation that always began to gnaw at a keeper's mind when the fog rolled in thick enough to choke the breath. But then it came again. Thud, thud, thud. 3 deliberate strikes that resonated up the spiraling iron staircase, vibrating through the soles of his heavy boots. He set the polishing cloth down on the brass railing. The air inside the lantern room, usually close and smelling of warm oil and brass polish, suddenly felt suffocatingly damp, carrying the sharp, metallic tang of ozone and rotting kelp. He wiped a smudge of oil from his brow, his heart beginning a slow, uneven percussion against his ribs. No ship could have made the passage through the jagged shoals known as the Devil's Teeth in this maelstrom, let alone deposited a living soul at his door. Elias took down the heavy iron lantern from its hook, the flame flickering nervously as if sharing his apprehension, and began the long descent. The descent was a journey through the claustrophobic anatomy of the lighthouse, past the watchroom, where the logbook lay open, its pages damp and curling at the edges, past the meager living quarters, where his cold supper of salted cod lay untouched, down into the echoing stone gut of the storage room. The knocking had ceased, replaced by the omnipresent roar of the ocean outside. He stood before the massive oak door, reinforced with iron bands, the heavy deadbolts thrown securely into the stone archway. He hesitated, the lantern light trembling in his hand, casting frantic, dancing shadows against the curved walls. He leaned his ear against the cold, damp wood. Silence, save for the storm. "Who's there?" His voice was a thin, reedy thing, swallowed instantly by the vastness of the space. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder, infused with a false bravado. "Identify yourself. This is a functioning lighthouse of the Crown." A sound answered him, but it wasn't a voice. It was a wet, slithering noise, like a massive body dragging itself across the slick stones of the landing outside. Then, a scratching, a frantic, scraping sound that set Elias' teeth on edge, traveling slowly up the height of the door as if whatever was out there was rearing up to its full, unnatural height. Water began to seep beneath the doorframe, not the clean, foaming spray of the ocean, but a viscous, dark sludge that smelled of ancient stagnation and decay. It pooled around his boots, a cold, black stain spreading across the flagstones. He stumbled back, raising the lantern. The sludge wasn't just water. It was thick with tangled masses of dark, ropey kelp and something else, pale, luminescent things that twitched and squirmed in the shallow pool. "The sea always takes back what belongs to it," the old keeper who had trained him used to say, his eyes vacant and haunted. "We build these towers, light these fires, thinking we can tame the dark. But we are just trespassers, Elias, just trespassers waiting to be evicted." The scratching stopped. For a moment, Elias allowed himself to breathe, hoping against reason that whatever had come with the tide had been washed back into the abyssal depths. Then the oak door shuddered. A concussive force struck it from the outside, bowing the thick wood inward and sending a shower of dust and ancient mortar down upon Elias. The heavy iron deadbolts groaned in their stone housing. He scrambled back, his boot catching on a loose stone, sending him sprawling to the floor. The lantern shattered, extinguishing the light, plunging him into the absolute, suffocating darkness of the tower's base. Another blow. The sound of wood splintering echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. Elias scrabbled frantically in the darkness, his hands slipping in the cold, foul-smelling sludge that now covered the floor. He found the lowest rung of the iron staircase and hauled himself up, his breath tearing in his throat. The door gave way with a final, catastrophic groan of tearing metal and splintering wood. The sound of the storm rushed in, a deafening cacophony of wind and water, but beneath it, Elias heard something worse. A collective, wet, shuffling sound, accompanied by a chorus of low, gurgling moans that sent a primal spike of terror through his mind. He didn't look back. He scrambled up the spiral staircase, his hands bleeding as they tore against the rough iron railing. The darkness was absolute, save for the faint, cyclical sweep of the lantern room light far above, casting erratic, dizzying patterns on the curved walls. The sounds pursued him. The wet slap of heavy, unnatural limbs on the iron steps. A smell so potent it made his eyes water and his stomach heave. The smell of the ocean floor, of dead things left to rot in the lightless pressure of the deep. He reached the living quarters and slammed the heavy metal door shut, throwing the bolt and leaning his full weight against it, gasping for air. The room was illuminated by a single, flickering oil lamp he had left burning on the small table. He grabbed the heavy cast-iron poker from beside the small stove, his knuckles white around the handle. The assault on the door began immediately. It wasn't a single entity trying to break through, but a chaotic, mindless battering. The heavy metal buckled and shrieked under the collective weight of whatever was on the other side. Elias backed away, the poker raised. He looked around the small, circular room, his sanctuary for the past 5 years. Now it was a trap. The single window, thick reinforced glass designed to withstand a hurricane, offered no escape, only a view into the swirling black maelstrom outside. Water began to pour beneath the door, faster now, a black tide carrying more of the writhing, luminescent things. They spread across the floorboards, seeking out the darkest corners of the room. The metal door groaned, the hinges tearing loose from the stone wall with a final, agonizing screech. It fell forward, crashing onto the floorboards, and the darkness rushed in. They poured into the room, a writhing, chaotic mass of horrors born from the deepest trenches of the ocean. Pale, translucent flesh, bloated and misshapen, limbs that bent at impossible angles, ending in hooked claws and grasping appendages, eyes that were milk-white spheres, blind yet focused entirely upon him. They were the drowned, the forgotten, the grotesque things that the sea had hidden away in its lightless depths, and they had come to reclaim the tower that had dared to pierce their darkness. Elias swung the heavy iron poker, striking a bloated, pallid mass that lunged at him. The weapon sank into the yielding flesh with a sickening squelch, dark, viscous fluid spraying across his face. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, echoing sound that vibrated in his skull and fell back. But there were too many. They swarmed over him, cold, clammy flesh pressing against him, countless limbs grasping, pulling, tearing. The heavy scent of ozone and decay filled his nose and mouth, suffocating him. He fought with a desperate, frantic strength, his screams lost in the roar of the storm and the cacophony of the monstrosities. He felt claws rake across his face, cold appendages wrapping around his throat, pulling him down into the writhing, black tide that had flooded the room. The last thing Elias saw before the darkness finally claimed him was the flickering light of the oil lamp being extinguished, snuffed out by a pale, swollen hand. The Blackwater Lighthouse stood for another century, a silent sentinel against the fury of the North Sea. The automated light swept its brilliant beam across the dark waters, indifferent to the storms that raged around it. The door at the base remained sealed, heavily reinforced and permanently barred. The locals on the mainland told stories, of course. Stories of the keeper who had gone mad in the isolation, who had thrown himself into the sea during the worst storm in living memory. But sometimes, on the darkest nights, when the fog rolled in thick and the wind howled around the stone tower, the automated light would falter, its steady beam flickering and dying, leaving the lighthouse plunged into absolute darkness. And on those nights, the locals swore they could hear something echoing from the solitary rock. Not the roar of the ocean, but a collective, wet, shuffling sound, and a chorus of low, gurgling moans, rising from the deepest, darkest bowels of the sea, reclaiming what had always belonged to them. The sea remembers, and the sea always takes back what is hers. The lighthouse was a monument to human arrogance, a vain attempt to bring light to a place meant to remain forever in the shadows. The creatures of the deep had merely corrected this arrogance, restoring the natural order. The stories became legend, a dark warning whispered by old sailors and fishermen who knew better than to tempt the fury of the ocean. They spoke of the pale things that crawled from the water, drawn by the artificial light, seeking to drag it down into the abyss. They spoke of the terrible silence that followed, a silence heavier and more profound than the storm itself. The old lighthouse, now devoid of human life, became a part of the ocean's domain, a silent, hollow shell echoing with the memories of the night the sea had taken its revenge. The beam of light, now cold and mechanical, continued its eternal sweep, a solitary beacon in a world that had forgotten the horrors lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the night when the light would fail again and the deep would rise once more. And Elia's thorn, the lonely keeper who had stared too long into the darkness, became just another ghost haunting the rocky shores, a cautionary tale of a man who believed he could tame the wild, untamed fury of nature's darkest creations. The deep holds its secrets well, and the old lighthouse stands as a monument to those secrets, forever casting its light upon the waters that hide the truth of what lies beneath.